Although I talk a lot about what I feel I did wrong as a young guy, there were a few things at the same time that I feel I did right. One of which was, for the most part, not letting fear control me. So, in other words, if ever I was afraid of something, rather than seeing that as a reason for me to not do that thing, I instead saw it as the opposite. I said to myself, if you're afraid of that thing, then you better go face that fear head on. So for example, one of my favorite examples, of course, when I was in high school, I remember that every morning before classes started, about 15 to 20 minutes prior, many people would congregate in the cafeteria and kind of socialize and mingle, because it was like this centralized location in the middle of the school. But for a lot of us, myself included, that was very intimidating and scary, because we were self-conscious back then, and what if we didn't have anybody to socialize with and we just kind of sat there looking kind of silly by ourselves or something like that? So a lot of us had the option of running from those fears and hiding, say, in the library, or just going to class really early, or sitting in our cars or something like that. But I never let myself give into that temptation to hide away in the library or something. And instead, I faced that fear head on, in particular because I was afraid of it. So I forced myself to go out there and do the best I could to socialize, even if that meant I was going to end up sitting there at a table by myself. And as uncomfortable as that might have been at the time, I did end up benefiting from that in many different ways. So in this video, I want to present to you just a few reasons for why I think you should also have that outlook that I still maintain to this day, that if ever you're afraid of something, then instead of that being a reason for you to not do that thing, it should be the opposite. It should compel you to go out there and face those fears instead. So first of all, you have to consider the precedent that you're setting, or the habit that you're getting yourself into. So if whenever you're afraid of something, that's enough of a reason for you to avoid it, then what's to say that the next time something different comes along that also intimidates you, you're not going to do that same thing and pretty much continue that trend for the rest of your life? I'd argue that that's a risk that you face. And that has its own subset of problems, most notably, what happens when something comes along that you can't run from or that you can't hide from? In that case, you're probably just going to be SOL because you don't know how to survive, you haven't learned how to face that situation, and you're probably just going to have a mental breakdown. Because life is full of opportunities and situations where you're not going to have a choice, and you have to learn how to cope with those things that you can't control or change. So you have to start hardening yourself to those things as soon as you possibly can, instead of trying to avoid them, because they are inevitable to an extent. So I think rejection is a great example of this, because sometimes you might like somebody that doesn't like you back. And you have to accept that instead of being too scared to face the reality that is that you're not going to get together with that person, because you can't force people to like you. But if you can't accept that, then you're probably just going to end up throwing a fit and making yourself out to be 100 times less attractive than you were originally. And you're also at the same time going to reaffirm their decision rather than giving them a reason to possibly reconsider in the future. Now, second of all, you're never going to learn by doing if you don't do, if you just avoid stuff all the time. And much less are you going to overcome those fears. And that's very necessary, because a lot of these situations don't just go away because you bury your head in the sand, because you're afraid of them. You're going to be called upon to face these fears at some point, so you might as well do it sooner rather than later. So I think stage fright is a great example of this. So I'll tell you that I'm not nearly as intimidated now as I was when I was a kid of getting up in front of a crowd and having to present something or speak in public. Because I know that it's a matter of just being confident in yourself and focusing less on the anxiety and more on the material and rehearsing and all those things. But I never would have learned any of that or learned to overcome that intimidation if I hadn't forced myself to put myself in those situations time and again. And it has come in handy at those times when I least expected it, such as when I had to present things to my superiors at work, or when I had to lead soldiers in the army, or when I had to do something as simple as going up and playing a song, playing guitar at an open mic or something like that. And third, as I always say, this is where you have to decide what kind of a person you want to be. Do you want to be the type of person that's confident and unafraid, or do you want to be the type of person who just hides under a rock whenever something scares you? And if it's me, I've always wanted to be the former, and I think you should too. And it's very easy to think of that as though you don't have a choice, that some people are just born with the ability to do things that you're too afraid to do. But that's not the case at all. There's nothing special about those people. There's nothing special about my classmates in high school that chose to go out there and socialize every morning, and I just don't have that inside of me. Instead, it's just a choice that they're making, quite simply. And if they can do it, then I can do it too. And I don't really have an excuse. And you're just kind of limiting yourself if you believe otherwise. So if in the future you ever find yourself afraid of something, whether it's speaking in front of a crowd or talking to a stranger, socializing, standing up for yourself, or even going skydiving or something like that, then that should be the only excuse you need to dive in headfirst and do that thing instead of running away from it. So if this helps, try it out. Let me know how it works for you, and I'll see you next time.